I'm Jim Williams. I'm a wildlife biologist. I've worked for over 3 decades in large carnivore conservation and ungulate conservation. And I wrote a book called Path of the Puma. Patagonia, the clothing company, has it on their website if you're interested in large carnivores in South America and here. And I also work now to protect migrations and connectivity for all wildlife at the Heart of the Rockies initiative. We have a Keep It Connected program that is incredible that most of the world really doesn't know about. And you can get on the website at Heart of the Rockies Initiative or Google Keep It Connected to get involved and support your local land trusts, because every project they do is permanent. It's durable. I'm looking forward to talking with you about these topics today, about wild things and wild places.
Welcome to The Trail Less Traveled, an adventure radio series and podcast dedicated to collecting stories and sounds from around the world in order to take you back to mankind's earliest form of entertainment, storytelling. This episode was recorded on location in collaboration with Xplorer Maps. Missoula, Montana is a mecca for outdoor enthusiasts, and each week we will bring you tales of adventure from both near and far, as well as information and inspiration and a few tunes to set the mood. You can subscribe to the podcast and learn about our international outreach projects at traillesstraveled.net. And now, here's your host, International Expedition Guide, Conservationist, and Yogi, Mandela.
Today, The Trail Less Traveled is being recorded at the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks headquarters in northwestern Montana. This is Region 1, and I'm sitting down with Jim Williams. Jim is a retired biologist and regional supervisor for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. He is the author of Path of the Puma, The Remarkable Resilience of the Mountain Lion, and he's now working for the Heart of the Rockies. Jim, first and foremost, thank you so much for taking the time and energy to join me here today on The Trail Less Traveled.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries. My pleasure.
Where did you grow up, and how was adventure and conservation a part of your childhood?
That's a good question. So I was born in Iowa farm country and raised in Pacific Beach, San Diego, which is, longboard surfing country. But when I was a kid on the family farm, I got interested in muskrat trapping and fox, and there weren't many deer back then, but I'd read old magazines. They were called Fur Fishing Game, about moose, bears, lynx in far-flung places like Alaska, Canada, Montana, Idaho, and just dream as a kid. And then I watched a show called Charlie the Lonesome Cougar. It's a cheesy Disney movie. And I was like, wow, bingo, I want to learn more about those. And so anyway, I've been pretty narrowly focused my entire life. Farm country was in trouble. Parents split up. I landed with my mother in San Diego and took up longboard surfing. I wasn't that good, but it was a lot of fun. I didn't compete, but I also snorkeled and free dove. And when I stuck my head underwater for the first time, I went, wow. And, the array of marine life, particularly in the early 70s, was different, more abundant, honestly. The biodiversity was greater to some degree. And that set me on a path for biology, initially marine biology. That was my undergraduate program, and ended up in graduate school in wildlife biology. And I've been pretty narrowly focused on conservation my entire life. Not sure why.
Well, Jim, instead of me, reading the inside book bio, I would love to just hear a little bit more about your background. How long have you been studying mountain lions?
It's actually, I started in graduate school. I was accepted. Dr. Harold Picton, he's passed now, from Montana State University, accepted me into the program, which was really difficult to get into, and especially being a non-resident, I was a Californian coming to Montana. You can imagine the response. But I worked on mountain lions for about 4 years under Dr. Picton and Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks on the Rocky Mountain front for graduate school. And then I became a field wildlife biologist, where I had to fly deer, elk, and antelope surveys every summer, fall, winter, spring, and set the seasons and work with game damage. And game damage is, deer, elk, high numbers on private lands and trying to mitigate those. And work in habitat conservation. We had a new program called Habitat Montana. My first conservation easement was in the Highwood Mountains by Great Falls. But I was a field biologist, an area wildlife biologist, and pretty much held accountable for all members of the public, all private property owners. But I also got to, do all the flights and surveys and research on all the wildlife species. And in about 99, I was kind of involuntarily promoted, but the wildlife program manager job came open here in Northwest Montana. And I'm more of a people person, and most of the biologists, want to work with animals and work outside versus working with people. And I'm the opposite. I get a lot done with relationships and people. So they knew that, and I resisted and eventually caved in. And actually, it was probably the best move I've ever made. So I became the wildlife program manager here in 99. And so I had this incredible crew, very talented bachelor's, masters, PhDs, postdocs up here. And we, together as a team, had to develop a fledgling, grizzly bear program, conflict management, a wolf program. Wolves were here already on their own before they were released, but then they were released and hitting critical mass. Lion conflicts, research, whether it's moose, lynx, deer, elk, bighorn sheep, mountain goats, you name it. I got to supervise this incredible team of wildlife biologists. So usually I dealt with, things when they became controversial and landed in my office or on my desk. But got to go in the field a lot and help create the programs and get them funded in the legislature with the wildlife administrator in Helena. I worked with two, Don Childress initially and Ken McDonald, who's still there now. And they're both very good. And, as a team, we were able to create and get these positions funded on a permanent basis that are here today, and programs that are here today that are really critical. And the reason wildlife is so abundant here today, too. There's a really good team. So I did that for about 17 years. And then in a weak moment, it was kind of another position that I really wasn't interested in, but I kind of took one for the team. I became the regional director up here and actually had a lot of fun. And so then I had enforcement, parks, fisheries, wildlife, ComEd, the front desk. I had them all. So I had about 120 people. So that really kept me on my toes. And I worked a lot with different governors and legislators. And it was a good career. So that's kind of the timeline, songline, if you will, from graduate school to now. And I flunked retirement, and I am currently flunking retirement. I am working as a wildlife biologist and partnerships manager for the Heart of the Rockies initiative. And I'll talk a little bit about land conservation in a bit, because I realized the last 10 years of my career what was going to be here when I was dead and gone. And it's critical, whether it's access or habitat.
And Jim, you've studied mountain lions not only in North America. Your travels have taken you all over the world.
Yeah, so mountain lions, I had a personal interest in mountain lions, clearly was my graduate work, but also we created another research project in the Gates of the Mountains wilderness area between Helena and Great Falls. Terry Inc. was a doctoral student we brought in, and we were looking at bighorn sheep and lions there, and I've been involved in the state plans and western plans and with all the states and the mountain lion world in the WAFWA, Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agency, workshops every couple of years on lions. So I never really left the lion world. And as part of that, I was flown down by the State Department, the United States State Department, to Argentina initially in the Partners of the Americas program, started under the Kennedy administration, to provide, share experiences with conflicts with agriculture and cattle and sheep in particular. In Argentina, there's a lot of cattle and sheep. And so I started, lifelong relationships with biologists down there, incredibly talented men and women that are doing groundbreaking work. And that filtered over into Chile. And Chris and Douglas Tompkins, Doug when he was alive, I stayed with them down there and used to fly their crews up here and pair them with biologists here just for shared exchanges. And those relationships really deepened too, and they're lifelong friends still today. So I got involved more as shared stories and experiences with the South Americans. They do an incredible amount of good work with very little resources down there. And it made me realize my biologists up here, when I was a wildlife program manager, are spoiled rotten compared to what some biologists are working with in other places.
Wow, Jim, you said a few things that caught my attention. You said land conservation, and you also said, oh, my friends, Chris and Doug Tompkins. Mm-hmm. So for those listening who don't know who they are and what they've done in terms of preserving large swaths of land in South America, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll start with Douglas and Chris. They're incredible. They're, in my mind, and it's just my personal opinion, they are on par with leaders around the planet in various countries that have created the large networks of public lands and protected areas. And granted, there are issues with colonialism and settlement with indigenous peoples and how that happened 200 years ago in this country in particular. But those are the reserves. Those are the ecological safe areas for the species that not only indigenous peoples value today, but everyone else as well. And so I don't mean to discount the colonial aspect of how parks and natural areas were created, but from an ecological perspective, thank goodness it happened, because humans consume and destroy for the most part. We all know that, right? And so with that in mind, what Teddy Roosevelt did, the Midnight Forest, and creating the public lands in this country that we enjoy today, Chris and Douglas Tompkins have done the same thing, even at a larger scale in South America, in Chile and Argentina. And no one believed it at the time, but they gave them all back to the respective countries, where local Argentinians and local Chileans and indigenous peoples and people that have moved there all own collectively and can enjoy because they're public. And then for me, as an ecologist, a wildlife biologist, those represent vast refuges of biodiversity, endemic species that are really unique and at a scale on par with the public lands in the United States or greater.
Powerful.
And Doug and Chris came from Patagonia, Incorporated, the clothing company started by Yvonne and Melinda Chenard, who have an equally incredible story in their own. Not enough time to go into all those, but and Douglas started the North Face company, when Yvonne started Patagonia, and they're all self-made, and they, unlike most very, very self-made, wealthy, industrial, commercial fortunes around the world, they gave it all away to create public lands and vast ecosystems as national parks or refuges or whatever the country calls them. And so they're really to be commended if you care about wild things and wild places. And I do.
Well, I think that it's a collective effort, and one of the things that people listening can do to do their part is to make sure they research and support companies that give back and take that stuff into account. Indeed.
And so locally, and I mean the Northern Rockies, my job now, I realized we did a lot of good land conservation here in Northwest Montana when I was at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, led by Gail Bissell and Alan Wood and a whole team here. That there's some of them and the people that have taken their place are still doing the work today as corporate timberlands like Plum Creek and then Weyerhaeuser and then Southern Pine Plantation, as they were changing hands or divesting their lands. That was about a third of the entire landscape in western Montana. They were all vulnerable to being sold on the free market and subdivided. So the last 10 years of my career, our team really focused on securing these relationships first, and then immense conservation easements, landscape scale conservation easements that precluded subdivision and secured and protected public access for everyone with or without means, rich or poor. And so I realized how important those projects were in the end. I loved research. I love, counting animals, flying animals, radio calling. Research is critical to good decision making. But I realized my time anyway, that I have left where I'm vital as a male, and because, women live longer, men don't, is I'm going to spend it supporting these permanent land conservation efforts. So I jumped at the chance to join Heart of the Rockies. So I support 30 land trusts now with an incredible young team, smart. I'm kind of the old dude on the team, but bringing my relationships that I had in my last career with indigenous partners that are 30-year friendships and trusted relationships and donors and natural resource professionals to the land trusts to help them do what they do best, and that is to permanently conserve land. Because the threat of subdivision has never been greater in the West. If you think about the crush of humanity that arrived in the Rocky Mountains in the West during the pandemic and after the pandemic, as remote work technologies were created with Zoom and Teams and what have you, and everyone wanted to live on a postcard. So they moved here, and the pressure to grow homes instead of food just, went through the roof. So that's what we do. We strive to keep working families on the land to still produce food. We still need to eat in this country, right? We need agriculture, but with that comes open space and wildlife habitat in the spaces between. In the spaces between parks, the spaces between Forest Service land, the spaces between BLM, the spaces between school trust lands, wildlife refuges. The conservation fight really, in my mind, isn't on public lands right now. It's the vulnerable spaces in between. Because if they're sold and residential subdivision footprints follow, that severs all wildlife connectivity, whether it's large carnivores, dispersal, natural range expansion, or ungulate migrations, deer, elk, antelope, long distance, short distance, even bighorn sheep and moose. So the spaces between are the vulnerable areas, and where, frankly, everyone, if you care about those things, should support keeping open and in food production and in agriculture. And it also keeps working families on the land. So it's a really apolitical result that these land trusts strive for.
I had some questions submitted from listeners. I'm going to go ahead and go through some of these. They kind of go all over the place, but I really like this format because people are really curious about the species. Before we jump into these questions, though, Jim, just like you introduced yourself, can you introduce us to this species, the mountain lion?
Yeah, so mountain lions are a pretty neat animal. Most people will never see one in the wild. They're very cryptic. They're referred to as the ghost of the forest or the ghost of the mountains because they've evolved a predation strategy that's called stalk and ambush. And they typically do that in times of low light, typically, not always, or at night. And they eat meat exclusively, so they need to take down prey, weekly or every other week to fuel their physiology, right? And in warm weather and cold weather. They have the largest distribution of a large carnivore on the planet, I believe, from the tip of Patagonia in South America all the way now into Northwest Territories and kind of knocking on the Southeast Alaska door. So they're very widely distributed, and they coexist with a myriad of other large carnivores and prey species throughout their range. And they're kind of the sports car of the animal world. They don't run long distances, but they're incredibly fast at short distances to take down their prey. And they typically, unlike African lions, for instance, Mandela, where you're from, these lions take down animals that are their size or larger, where other than elephants, African lions typically take down their size or smaller, other than elephants, right? And maybe some of those big kudus. But mountain lions, pumas, panthers, cougars, they're all the same thing. They're the cat of many names. They take down prey for the most part that are their size and larger. And it's pretty impressive. And they do it solo. So they're a pretty cool animal. They're not really opportunivores. That's what I call grizzly bears and black bears. They can eat a little bit of everything, including garbage. A mountain lion would never stoop to crawling in a dumpster like grizzly bears and black bears do here locally. They want to take down their own prey that's fresh. And yeah, they're cool animals. They hold special places in indigenous cultures from South America to here too. Humans identify with animals that hunt like we did and do, and lions are clearly one of the best hunters out there. They're also feared because there is the rare, very rare incidence of mountain lion human incidents and encounters and fatalities. But again, you're far more risk driving on winter in Montana than you are ever of getting in an encounter with a cat or a bear, frankly. But they're way back in the recesses of our monkey brains. We don't like sharks, bears, lions, things with teeth that can eat us because we have these imaginations. the possibility is there, but fortunately it doesn't happen too much. It's tragic when it does.
Jim, we have a friend in common whose name is also Jim, and he's also a retired wildlife biologist, Jim Vassro. And Jim submitted some questions that I would like to ask you now, and we kind of are going to move all over the place. Right now that we're talking about the hunting techniques of the mountain lion, maybe I'll jump into this question. Mountain lions are magnificent but seldom seen. How do lions hunt and kill their prey? How successful are they? Is hunting dangerous for lions?
Yes, those are good questions. Predation is never without risk for any carnivore of any size, and including mountain lions. I have seen photos. There's a classic one that's almost infamous up here of a bighorn ram, a young one, and a mountain lion both laying dead on the St. Mary's Road in Glacier Park, where clearly there was a predation attempt on a cliff above and they both perished below. But I've actually, I knew a biologist that was working on mule deer in the Bridger Mountains, and he was flying down there and saw a lion jump on a mule deer buck, and the buck tossed the lion over the top of his antlers and then proceeded to ram it into a little side hill. And the plane, as he circled in the Super Cub, he watched the lion limp away in the snow bleeding. So predation's never without risk. But for the most part, or they wouldn't be here, they've evolved these types of hunting strategies through millennia. If they weren't successful, they wouldn't be here, right? They have to live to reproduce and survive. So the success rate for lion kills, it's not bad. Clearly they don't kill everything that they try to, but they're pretty efficient stalk and ambush predators, and they typically wait until an animal is in very close range and it's a quick rush. I have never witnessed the event. I have countless times showed up right after it's happened, and the track's in the snow and the lion's in the bushes next to me, and I still can't see it, but the signal's coming out of the bush into my receiver. They're like ghosts, but that's the one thing I've never watched is a mountain lion take down a deer or an elk right in front of me. I've been there right after countless times, but it's hard to see, and that's for good reason, right? They don't want to be seen. They don't want to be smelled, right? That's how they're successful.
All right, so we were just talking about how people tend to fear things with sharp teeth that might eat them. Mm-hmm. The next question that was submitted was, do people need to be afraid of lions? How should we behave if we meet a lion? And does bear spray work?
Yeah, bear spray works on everything, including people.
Yeah.
It's very. I used to tell my daughter and son, is like, bear spray is a handy thing to have in the woods because it works on all mammals and non-mammals in part. But it's good to train and learn how to use it, and you really don't want to spray into the wind because it's an irritant as well. But bear spray, I recommend to everyone, particularly in the Northern Rockies where we have a full complement of native large carnivores. To carry bear spray, it's just a wise thing, and you're going to be accurate compared to shooting a handgun. Unless you have a shotgun and you like carrying the weight with double-aught buck, that's the easiest thing to hit your target, but the bear spray is too. Mm-hmm. But most people carry handguns, and you have to be an expert marksman to hit your target when an animal's coming quickly and you're full of adrenaline. Unless you train and you're a professional, bear spray, I think, is a much safer protective option for you. So, yeah, should we be afraid of large carnivores? And I'll lump in wolves and grizzly bears and black bears and mountain lions. I'll just kind of talk about all of them. Have a healthy respect for all these large carnivores, but you honestly should be more afraid about driving right now on a winter road because you're much more likely to hurt yourself and others. The probability, the odds of having an encounter are so small compared to other ways that you can get hurt as a human, whether it's disease, health, traffic, driving, you name it. We worry about things that really aren't going to happen. Now, those odds go up when you're in their environment and you're hiking in Glacier Park or the Bob Marshall Wilderness in the middle of summer and you're in bear country. Yeah, the probability goes up. You could have an encounter, but even then, it's pretty small compared to the other things in your life that could hurt you or make you ill. So, should we be neurotic about it and worry about it? No, of course not. Should we respect them and, frankly, appreciate that they're out there? I, for one, want to live in a world where humans aren't at the top of the food chain. I like it that when I'm in the mountains or I'm in the woods, that when I hear a twig snap, the adrenaline goes off, and way back in the recesses of my own little monkey brain, I wonder what it is. That creates wildness, and I value that. And I also value the ecological role that those large carnivores have served in shaping and creating the animals I like to eat, like an antelope or a mule deer or a white-tailed deer or an elk. It's an ancient dance of hoof and tooth. And, we need to remember that these animals, heaven forbid, what did they do before, white Europeans showed up? We tend to have all these solutions for large carnivores and panic over prey populations. But, these animals have been doing that song and dance with cold winters and everything that affects deer and elk, fawn and calf recruitment for millennia, long before we had technologies and even firearms to hunt them. But I value their role in shaping the species that I like to see and eat and know that exist on the landscape. So, have a respect, appreciate them. And if you do encounter one of these large carnivores, bear spray is very handy. For a lion in particular, the key thing is kind of like a domestic dog that's not friendly. You don't run. You run the risk of initiating a predatory response. A dog will chase you, and a cat probably will too. With a cat, you want to walk away slowly, don't take your eyes off it, and fight back. There's just been a tragic incident of a young man, a friend of mine who's a writer, just published a story, Malcolm Brooks, in the New York Times, of his nephew getting killed in California with his two nephews, where they're together. One lived, one did not. And if you can, and they couldn't, you fight back. But they're a large predator, right? So, having some kind of protection is not a bad idea. But the odds of that happening, fortunately, are small. But fight back for a cat. For a bear, there's different recommendations. You can Google all these online now. You curl up and play dead with a grizzly bear and let the bear think it has neutralized the threat, and hopefully it moves on. Mm-hmm. A female with her cubs. You don't want to fight back with a grizzly bear. With a black bear, it's different. If you have a predatory black bear, you want to throw everything you have at it, because that's not normal, and it's probably looking at you as prey. But you can Google all those things. They're all available online on what to do. But in the end, again, there are so many more things that are going to potentially be harmful to you than wildlife that you probably should worry about more.
Agreed. And I want to also highlight that all of these carnivores, Jim mentioned, mountain lions, wolves, grizzly bears, black bears, they play a significant role in making Montana such a special place. There's a lot of tourists also coming from out of state to come and see these animals. Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned wolves, and one of the listener-submitted questions is, has the reappearance of wolves changed how and where mountain lions hunt?
That's a great question, and my opinion is yes. And there's been some brilliant researchers doing work on this. The first researcher that was a friend of mine named Toni Ruth. She worked for Morris Hornacher when he had the Hornacher Wildlife Institute, and she followed Carrie Murphy, another biologist, in the northern range of Yellowstone, the Lamar Valley, where everyone watches wolves now. But prior to wolves being reintroduced, Carrie had mountain lions. Carrie Murphy did radio-collared, and then Toni Ruth followed after wolves to look at that relationship. And some of the peer-reviewed research that she has published is that, before wolves, lions could pretty much prey on elk, primarily a mule deer, secondarily, anywhere in the Lamar Valley. After wolves, and wolves are the top dog in the forest, and I'll get to that. After wolves, they were kind of forced to the margins in the steeper, rugged country that lions can inhabit, because wolves are a cursorial predator. They run down their prey, typically in open, flat spaces, not exclusively, and in groups, where lions, they use topography, they can, and do it in the open. But after wolves, it kind of pushed them to the more topographically diverse areas to exist. Two reasons. One, that's where they don't have to worry about a pack of wolves killing them, because wolves, a pack, can kill, especially juvenile cats that they get up a tree, that jump out of the tree. Rarely, and I have seen a few instances where a large male mountain lion, referred to as a tom, will kill a single wolf. But usually wolves are in packs. They hunt as a group. So wolves are the top dog. And then another researcher, Mark Elbrock, who's working in the Olympic Peninsula right now, but he did some really neat work near Grand Teton Park in Wyoming that looked at wolves and how they would displace lions off their kills and potentially create more of a caloric demand to the cats, because they'd have to kill again to feed their kittens and nurse their kittens. So yes, wolves do have an impact on lions, but again, like we talked about earlier, roll the clock back before white Europeans showed up, and it was just indigenous peoples, the native species that were here. Wolves and lions coexisted, right? Probably at natural densities that maybe we didn't experience after wolves were eradicated and lions came back first, right? In the 70s, lions came back. And so we probably had an artificially high density of cats, perhaps, socially for the cats, behaviorally. They kind of in that 2 to 4 adults per 100 square kilometers, resident adults, not including dispersers. That's pretty similar all the way to South America. But, that was in many instances areas where wolves have been exterminated, by settlement. Now wolves are back, and it's more of a natural relationship between the two large carnivores.
Can we just take a moment to highlight some of the positive ecological benefits of both wolves and mountain lions? And, if you want to throw in grizzly bears and black bears too, you can.
Yeah, they've all co-evolved for millennia, right? They have all occupy niches and have different behaviors to take down their food in the grocery stores that they shop in, if you will, because they're all different with overlap. They've all coexisted for millennia, thousands and thousands of years. Yeah, it's hard to pin down exact ecological benefits. That's a clear example for most folks because it's all about very complicated relationships between these species, their prey, and the habitats they live in. And that's going to change monthly, weekly, annually, and then over longer time frames. If you think about ungulates, if you like antelope, mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, moose, they all have impacts on their habitat. These large carnivores can move them around the landscape. To actually document cause and effect, those, my personal opinion is very difficult. I've seen people do it, but I'm always suspect. There's clearly relationships there, but there's a lot to learn yet with newer technologies that are going to come when I'm not around. But yeah, there's intrinsic value, I think, of having a full complement of native species on the landscape. We don't like to, as humans, share our deer and elk that we hunt and eat and enjoy and treasure and have spent millions of dollars on recovering after settlement. We don't like to share them with other things, especially native carnivores. That's just part of human behavior, I think. And after a career in a state wildlife agency, that's probably why my hair turned white. It's people worried about wolves more than anything. The wolves are probably more challenging to work with than grizzly bears, black bears, and lions all combined.
Hello, you beautiful people. Thank you for listening to the show. We are just going to take a short break for a message from our sponsor.
Hello, listeners. My name is Kevin, and I'm a sales manager at Xplorer Maps in Missoula, Montana. At Xplorer Maps, we create beautiful hand-drawn maps and map gift products. We're all about connecting people with place. I just love doing this job because I literally get to see people stand in front of maps all the time, and they're just like a time machine. I see people look at where they've been and then where they're planning to go. It's actually a very beautiful thing. My favorite map is the Thousand Islands map, actually. It's the closest map to where I grew up in Canada. If you're more interested in learning about creating maps and maybe even different map gift items, please go to our website, explorermaps.com. That's XPLORERMAPS.com. No E on Explorer. Be sure to use your promo code Mandela when making your purchase. Okay, enjoy the rest of the show. Now I'm going to get back to connecting people in place in beautiful Missoula, Montana. Thank you.
Today, the trail less traveled is being recorded at Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks headquarters in northwestern Montana. And I'm sitting here with Jim Williams. He is the author of the book, Path of the Puma, The Remarkable Resilience of the Mountain Lion. He was also the regional supervisor for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. He's a biologist who's working on retiring, but he's currently working for the Heart of the Rockies. Now, Jim, I'd like to talk to you about animal migration Right now, there is the largest wildlife crossing in the world being built, and that is connected to mountain lions, habitat connectivity. And so this is pivotal. It's on my mind, especially because I'll be driving down 93 on my way back to Missoula today, and there's so many wildlife crossings there. So let's talk a little bit about barriers to animal movement.
So this is where the conservation fight is, if you will. I don't like the word fight, but it is. It's a struggle. It's a challenge. Challenge is a better word. Is connectivity. And animal populations need to be connected for genetic reasons, for population health, for dispersal, for a whole host of biological reasons. Things need to be connected, right? Everything's connected. Well, between blocks of public land, particularly in this country, lie private land. And typically in rural transboundary Northern Rockies, for instance, from Jackson Hole and Sun Valley north, that's where I work now for the Heart of the Rockies initiative, it's rural agricultural lands for the most part, but they're also strikingly beautiful lands that are perfect for subdivisions and view lots. And so therein lies the tension. So we want to keep the landscape open for ungulate migrations and large carnivore, mesocarnivore, small carnivore, all species connectivity, birds included. People forget about birds. So we need migrations. These animal movements have evolved over millennia. They happen for a reason. These animals are still here, and they're still here because different strategies have enabled these populations to persist by moving to find food under different conditions, whether it's temperature, whether it's precipitation, what have you. So these movements enable these populations to persist. So they're very vulnerable right now. We have a program where I work called Keep It Connected. And I can tell you, after over 3 decades in this conservation business, it's the coolest program that the world really doesn't know about. And the reason no one knows about it is the Heart of the Rockies initiative is really a behind-the-scenes organization, very small, and it's in a support role for land trusts. And land trusts have a tool called a conservation easement that they work with willing landowners, property owners, with their property rights and their estate planning, that if the property owner is more interested in growing food and being an agricultural operation than subdividing and creating neighborhoods, they can do or exercise what's called a conservation easement, where they give up the right to subdivide either voluntarily, and there are tax benefits, or paid. There are private philanthropy and government farm bill programs that offer some financial compensation. And that is critical because these conservation easements in the United States are in perpetuity, which means forever. They don't expire. And so that's important. These projects, for me, selfishly, that I get to help these land trusts do now, are going to be here when I'm gone from this beautiful planet. They're permanent. They're durable. There's not a lot of conservation that is durable. There's a lot of talk, not a lot of action, which is fine. So this Keep It Connected program, we have 30 land trust members from Jackson Hole and Sun Valley, locally here, the Flathead Land Trust, Five Valleys in Missoula, and Canadian, like Southern Alberta Land Trust Society or Nature Conservancy, British Columbia. We have 30 members. If they bring a project to us that intersects with wildlife connectivity and ungulate migration or large carnivore connectivity, for instance, a lot of donors are interested in grizzly bear persistence. If they bring a property and the landowner's working on an easement and there is a gap in funding, for instance, the farm bill pays about 75% of what the family really wanted to pull off this project, what the Heart of the Rockies initiative team does is go look for private philanthropy donors to close that gap, to make sure that project hits the ground and is permanent, to protect an antelope migration, if you will, in Wyoming, or a white-tailed deer migration here in the Flathead Valley, or grizzly bear connectivity between the Yellowstone and Idaho, or the Yellowstone and the Northern Continental Divide. So this Keep It Connected program features 30 projects that are active on a private website available to donors only, and as land trusts come to us with these projects, Amy Katz is our conservation manager. She vets them through GIS with data layers, with telemetry, with models, indigenous knowledge, you name it. And if it's a match for connectivity, then I get to go look for donors, my team does, to help close the gap. So it's called Keep It Connected. It's going to protect migrations in perpetuity. So I'm very selfish with my time at this point in my life. This is the reason I'm not drinking margaritas on a beach in San Diego, all right? Is that these projects are too important because they're permanent, they're durable, they're expensive. It's land conservation, it's private property. But the greater the successes are for these local, often small, local and rural land trusts, the more likely these migrations for elk and deer and antelope will persist in perpetuity. And so I always tell people land trusts are now the unsung heroes in conservation. They fly under the radar for good reason. It's often political with property rights. They're rural and local, but everything they do is permanent. And that's what I call durable conservation. So it's worth my time, and I think it's worth everyone's time. Support your local land trust. But back to migrations. So how do you protect antelope migration in Wyoming near Jackson Hole or Cody, Wyoming, that goes through oil and gas fields and mountain and forest service and then hits areas that could be developed for neighborhoods? You do a conservation easement with a willing seller, and that keeps the land in open space and food production. One of the coolest things I've seen the land trust community do, and it's the nonprofit world doing it, is instead of what I often did in government, where you are regulatory and there are rules for endangered species, the land trusts celebrate the landowners for their stewardship of their lands that has maintained these migrations on the landscape for thousands of years. So rather than tell the property owners what to do, they celebrate their stewardship that's happening right now. And how do you capture that so it doesn't change and these antelopes still migrate through here on their 250-mile journey, or mule deer or elk or you name it? So how do you capture their stewardship that's happening right now in sheep or cattle production or even farming? And that is what they do with this tool called a conservation easement. So that's why I'm still working and not retired.
Now, coming back to mountain lions, I was wondering if you could answer this listener-submitted question. How are lions doing with increasing human populations? Can lions and humans coexist? And I feel like this ties into what you were just talking about, wildlife connectivity. Let's talk about coexistence in Montana with more and more people moving here. The wildlife, habitats, you're working on making sure that there's habitat that's permanently protected, but that doesn't necessarily prevent more and more people from moving here. So let's talk about coexistence.
Yes, that's a complicated human issue, right? I've learned that landowner tolerance isn't always a good phrase. That's kind of a forced occupancy on a property, right, by someone that likes wildlife. What I've learned from a landowner's perspective, it's more mitigating the costs that are incurred to having grizzly bears and lions and black bears and wolves on their property. So it's not really tolerance per se, it's how do you mitigate those costs. So with lions in particular, because they are invisible and we don't know they're there, they do pretty well. It's when we know they are there that the conflicts occur usually, and that's tracks in the snow, often in the West, in the winter. They're rarely seen because they hunt at dawn and dusk and at night, but it's when we know they're there. And so what worries me a little bit, and I talk about it in my book, there's a statement in there, is with these new technologies with game cameras and ring cameras, and now we know they're there, remote camera technologies, how will we tolerate them? Will it be to the same degree that we've tolerated, these large carnivores in the past, where we had an idea that they were there, but we didn't really know that they were in our backyard, which we now know they are. Because if you have deer in northwest Montana, you have lions, plain and simple. There are grizzly bears in the Flathead Valley now. There are wolf populations that rim the valley. All of these large carnivores, particularly wolves and mountain lions that eat meat almost exclusively, you have to protect their grocery store. Without the grocery store, you're not going to have any shoppers, right? And the grocery store is deer and elk, and that's why we need to protect the open spaces for their winter ranges and not subdivide the entire landscape. We need to have some open agriculture left. For bears, they're a little more opportunity driven with vegetation like huckleberry. We have huckleberry grizzlies up here. They're different, and there's different threats, but subdivisions for bears provide human-related attractants, and that's the death knell for bears. So these subdivisions will physically block migrations in the case of deer and elk, or they'll provide human attractants that will end up in the death of grizzly bears and black bears. So tolerance relates to the amount of open space, undeveloped land that is left in an ecosystem, and it also relates to individual landowners and individual people on our personal human values toward that animal. And there can be a lot of great work done in the education realm there. I don't like to say we're educating people, that's condescending, but providing information for people. And like you do through stories, people relate to stories. You can literally change the perspective of neighborhoods and individuals with good information and good stories because we're human. And so that's the opportunity. So not everything's negative in the tolerance role. As people learn and their values change, that can benefit. Again, I'm going to use the word tolerance, if you will, but it will. And that issue is circumpolar and around the globe. In Africa and Australia, I don't care where you're at, if you don't have food, water, and shelter, your even interest in wildlife is going to go down, right? We have basic needs, need to be met. And then on top of that, what are the generational cultural attitudes toward wildlife in your area? All those things with information can evolve too. So there's opportunity, but it depends on us. So there's two big things. One is the habitat. We need the open spaces that provide the food for the carnivores, if that's your thing. And the other is an open mind and an open heart and willingness to learn maybe a little more than you already know.
Jim, what have mountain lions taught you both as a wildlife biologist and as a human being?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I think patience is a good one because I'm not the most patient type, my personality type. I drink a lot of coffee and I can get wrapped around the axle and wound up just like the next person. But, working on cats when I was a field biologist and younger, it's very hard-won data that, we couldn't get up in the air and even fly, but once every 2 weeks to find radio colors from a bush plane, a super cub, you have to just take a deep breath and be patient. Nowadays, you have satellite GPS collars. You can watch them move from your computer in your office. It's a whole different game. We had to live with the animals we worked on back then. But patience is probably the biggest. And humility, too. You think about an animal that's not going to be successful every time it tries to take down its meal. I'm going to go and I could run by McDonald's and get a quarter pounder, right? I don't have to kill something and potentially get lethally or fatally wounded to do it. So, humility is a good thing with all wildlife. And actually, honestly, wildlife has inspired me my entire life, whether it's aquatic, whether it was in the oceans, in freshwater, or terrestrial wildlife. I just love the intricacies and the connectivity of the natural world. To me, that is my spirituality, if you will, is how things are connected on this planet. So I think it's worth keeping some places wild.
That's the voice of Jim Williams, author of Path of the Puma. Jim, what advice on life would you share with whoever's listening out there?
Oh, follow your passion. Don't take no for an answer. I learned that from half the biologists I supervise. They didn't take no for an answer at all and would throw things right back at me. But don't take no for an answer. Don't ever hesitate from calling a government, a public employee. Those are tough jobs, federally and state and tribal, about questions or advice because their job is to work with you. People are intimidated to call their local biologist, state, federal, tribal, but don't be, because that's their job. They get paid to talk to you. And be respectful. They have difficult jobs because they're never going to make everyone happy, but call them and learn and develop a relationship. Your life will be richer for it. I give my own kids the same advice. Don't give up. Don't take no for an answer. And if you get knocked back down, get right back up. And look forward. Appreciate the past, but don't dwell on the past. And I get back to that Jimmy Buffett song. He's got another lyric. He says, I got a watch, and it only says now. And it's real easy to think about why things happen when really it's how you handle what's going on right now that matters. And so focus on the future, what you can change, and don't waste any time on what you can't. My advisor in graduate school and dear family friend and mentor, Dr. Harold Picton, told me, and I got to remember he was a professor at Montana State University in the wildlife department, but he got his doctorate in physiology at Northwestern, and he said to me once when I was all wound up, wrapped around the axle over some issue, I don't remember, but he said, Mr. Williams, in a very calm way, and he said, remember, you are only born with so many heartbeats. Choose where you want to use them wisely. I never forgot that. And you have to remind yourself, is this worth my stress right now? No, most of the time. And it's just human to get wound up. So that's my advice.
Jim Williams, thank you so much for your time and your energy joining me on the Trail Less Traveled.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And I really appreciate all of the time and energy that you're continuing to put into working with organizations like the Heart of the Rockies, where we can do some durable conservation.
Yeah, we got a website. Get on there and learn more, or call me if you have questions.
Hi, my name is Cameron Evans, and I'm the Communications Director for the Montana Wildlife Federation, the oldest and largest conservation organization in Montana dating back to 1936. Since our start, we've joined with landowners and others to protect our wildlife, habitat, and public access. My conservation tip of the week is to always ask for permission before hunting on private land. Montana law requires hunters to get approval from landowners before hunting, whether you're after upland birds, coyotes, or any other game animal. This includes entering private land to retrieve game or access public land. Permission can be granted in person, over the phone, or through posted signs, so make sure you secure it ahead of time to respect private property and follow the law. For more information and to become a member of the Montana Wildlife Federation, visit montanawildlife.org. That's montanawildlife.org.
That's it for this week's adventure, my friends in Missoula and around the world. But until next week, please remember, conservation is not a spectator sport. Living in Missoula is a privilege. With privilege comes responsibility. Please get educated and engaged. Speak up on behalf of wildlife and wild places. And if you think you're too small to make a difference, well, then you've never spent the night with a mosquito.